That's funny because I always just have to set it up and go when I'm going to Facebook and YouTube through the class.
Facebook stream.
Yes. Okay, now there's people watching on YouTube. Okay, welcome on YouTube. Sorry that wasn't live right away. But we will be reading the book of Esther momentarily. And if you're donating to the needy, vetted, truly needy people for special needs, food insecurity, shelter insecurity, etc., people we've been interacting with directly, you can donate to our website, get the tax break, and we will pass it straight to them. All donations today are going to the needy. So if you're on Facebook, you can do the donate button or go right to our website, donate.accidentaltalmudist.org. Mention Purim when you make the donation. I'm going to have the mail here. Okay, that's working. Everything is working. And over there on the Facebook side, let's see who's in the house with us.
Who's in the house?
Yehud in South Carolina. Christopher says Chag Purim Sameach. Harry, a Freilich in Purim Sameach. Beautiful, some Yiddish, some Hebrew. Paula says hello. Guy in Dayton. Paul in Chicago. Lucy in Minnesota. Harry Weiss is in Yerushalayim. Checking in. Great to have you with us, Harry.
Very cool.
Anderson in Ontario, Canada. Lisa is in Arlington, Massachusetts. Harold Black is in Portland. Lucy loves your hair. Nina.
This is once a year. I pull out my blue wig, and this is that day.
This is that day. Christopher in Mercedes, Texas. Aoife says Hag Sameach. Harry says, be there soon, save me son. Aoife's checking in from Florida. Lynn watching over on the Facebook side, usually on YouTube. Gisette says, Hag Purim Sameach. Lots of people checking in. Yay. It's going to be a lot of people. We're going to have to just start doing it. Wait, Yehuda tried to donate, but it is not going through Facebook. We'll do it separately. Yeah, so just go through our website. That should always work. For any reason, the donate button on Facebook itself not working. Kevin is checking in from Israel. He says Purim is officially over here, but I am joining in anyway.
Motzi Purim for you.
Although if you live in a walled city here, we have
right.
Shushan Purim.
So
that's right.
Tomorrow?
Second day.
Yeah.
So it's already started in Israel, right? Okay. They're in Shushan Purim already. And cities that were walled,
but you have to be in the
at the
old
time.
City, though, right?
I think the old city counts as one of those cities
that was walled.
So
our daughter's in Jerusalem right now, but she's not actually in the old city. So
Pedro Fotografo donated. Thank you on behalf of the needy people who will receive that donation. Well done, Pedro. Leona Sue in Southern Illinois. Ruth in Michigan. Karen in Northern California. Wendy in Vancouver. Chris Mala Branch just donated.
Thank
Beautiful.
You, Chris.
Remember, when you donate on Purim, you're fulfilling a significant mitzvah of sending gifts to the poor. That is a significant mitzvah that you're fulfilling today. And there's a mitzvah to have a meal. And there's a mitzvah to give gifts to friends. And there's a mitzvah to become intoxicated at some level. L'chaim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shak l'nehib d'varo.
Amen. Whew. Delicious.
Oh, Sharon, it's so good. The
so
Chazak bourbon. It really is.
Love
Cask strength, but tasty, tasty. All right. Let's just double checking what's going on here. 4 people watching over there on the YouTube side. Aoife and Raphael from Denver and Marie Latour, who loves your hair, Nina. Okay. Fabulous. All right. And just checking in over here. All right. I think everything is now set for us to get busy. All right. Reading the book of Esther, the annual tradition at Accidental Talmudist. We're not going to, stop for too much commentary on the way through. We're just going to do a straight read. But I think it is worth just thinking about something to keep in mind, right, as we embark on the story of the book of Esther. This is not first, it's true. The main thing is this happened, right? This happened. These events happened. And when you think, sometimes you read this story and we're so accustomed to the miraculous turnaround, all the Jews are slated to die on a particular day. And because of the hidden hand of God, whose name is never mentioned in this book, but who orchestrates events, so completely, against the laws of chance, right? Like, I'm an accidental Talmudist because I happened to buy book 1 of the Talmud on day 1 of a 7.5-year cycle. So unlikely that obviously God's hand took a role in those events. Likewise here, the Purim story. And we're just so accustomed to that that it almost doesn't strike us like how miraculous it must have seemed to the people involved. And if we just take a step back and get the context of it, so this is between the 2 temples. The first temple had been destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar of Bavel, of Babylonia, and then Babylonia was defeated by the Persian Empire, and now it's this, upstart Persian Empire that is running the world, and Ahasuerus is the king of the greatest, largest empire the world had ever known. The Jews were dispersed out of the Holy Land in many various, regions and provinces of this Persian Empire. And years had passed, but not so many years, right? So this is not in the 70th year of the exile, so maybe it's been 40, 50 years.
So the Babylonians, they captured us, they brought us to captive, and then they were overthrown pretty soon after, because we're talking about only 70 years the whole
exactly, and it's even less than that. So woe unto Israel when we anger God, and woe unto the instrument of God's anger sent to punish the Jewish people. Right? Nebuchadnezzar was given the power by God to defeat the Jewish people because of our sins in the First Temple era, but then Nebuchadnezzar himself was destroyed and his empire lost. Figure it's just been a few decades since the First Temple was destroyed. Now, when the Second Temple was destroyed by Rome, centuries later, there was this sense that it's over, and the temple's not going to be rebuilt. And then Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and Rabbi Gamliel and the other sages who moved to Yavne were creating a kind of portable Judaism out of the ashes of temple-based Judaism, right? That hadn't happened when the first temple was destroyed. So there was this sense like maybe it's over. We lost the relationship, the privileged relationship with God that we had when the temple stood, and we're not going to get it back. And the people are scattered all over the world, and then comes a decree that all the Jews are going to be killed in one day. And it must have seemed to them like a continuation of the destruction of the first temple. And yet they pulled together, they prayed beyond any measure of rationality that God would step in and save them. And God not only saved their lives, but engineered such a complete reversal so fast that Esther becomes queen of the greatest empire the world had ever known. Mordechai is the right-hand man of the king, really helping him run things. And is Esther's son, who becomes Darius the Mede, who authorizes the rebuilding of the second temple. So when we keep what happens before and what happens after in mind, this story really pops.
The best part of the story is you may have heard the expression, hoisted on his own petard. Well, this is the ultimate example of that, as you shall see.
Just so. And I'm seeing other people are donating. Yay. Beautiful. Helping us feed the needy on this Purim. Janice Beanstalk donated. Rebecca Cohen donated. Yehudit Sobel donated. Nina Soliner donated. Reba Linker donated. Yasher Koach, may you all be strengthened. And everything that you give to the poor and needy on Purim, it should come back to you 10 times.
Amen to that.
All right, so if I could just do a reload of that
stopped.
feed. No, it's just reloading. Yes, we've already raised $250. Fantastic. That's going to pass through AT to the needy on this day. Okay, let's start.
It's the time for the main event.
It's the main event. Do you want to start?
Sure.
Okay.
So let's see if I can do this without my reading glasses. Chapter 1. It happened in the days of Ahasuerus. He was the same Ahasuerus who ruled from India to Kush, 127 provinces. In those days, when King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne, which is in Shushan, the capital, in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast for all his ministers and servants, the army of Persia and Media, the governors and the ministers of the provinces in his presence, when he displayed the glorious wealth of his kingdom and the splendorous beauty of his majesty. This guy loves to party. He made this feast for many days, 180 days. It's a party lasting 180 days. And when those days were completed, it wasn't enough, so the king made another 7-day feast for all the people in Shushan, the capital, just the people living in the capital city, from the greatest to the smallest, in the courtyard of the garden of the king's orchard. He draped white, green, and blue cloths embroidered with threads of linen and purple wool, silver columns and marble pillars for the guests to sit on. He arranged gold and silver divans for the guests to recline on during the feast. On a floor of various precious stones, Bahat and Shesh, Dar and Sakharet, I guess different kinds of stones,
Precious stones.
He instructed his butlers to pour with golden vessels, and there were vessels of different kinds. And there was royal wine in abundance as befitting a king. The drinking was as appropriate without coercion, for so had the king established ordering all the stewards of his household to do in accordance with the desire of each and every man. I guess it means, to have what you want. You gonna start with Vashti, or should I keep going?
Keep going.
Okay, Vashti's refusal. Queen Vashti, likewise, made a feast for women in the royal palace of King Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, when the king's heart was merry with wine, he ordered Mehuman, Bitselad, Karvana, Bigta, Vagta, Zetar, and Charkis, the 7 chamberlains who attended King Ahasuerus, to bring Queen Vashti before the king, adorned with the royal crown, and I believe adorned only with the royal crown, to show the nations and ministers her beauty. Modesty was not an important value in Shushan, for she was
when they were drinking like that,
beautiful
especially.
appearance. She was beautiful appearance. Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's bidding, brought by the chamberlains, and the king grew furious, and his wrath seized within him. The king spoke to the sages, those knowledgeable of the times, for this was the king's custom, to bring all judicial questions before those who were versed in every law and statute. Those close to him, so that he could present his questions to them, were Karshena, Shetar, Admata, Tarshish, Meres, Marsena, and Memachan. These were the 7 ministers of Persia and Media who had access to the king and ranked highest in the kingdom. He said to them, by law, what should be done to Queen Vashti for failing to obey the order of King Ahasuerus brought by the chamberlains? Memucan declared before the king and the ministers, it is not only against the king that the Queen Vashti has sinned, but against all the ministers and all the nations and all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For word of the queen's act of belittling the king will reach all the women, causing them to belittle their husbands in their eyes. Slippery slope. For they will say, King Ahasuerus concluded that Queen Vashti be brought before him, yet she did not come. This very day, the noble women of Persia and Media who have heard of the queen's deed will repeat it to all the king's nobles, creating much disgrace and anger. If it please the king, let a royal edict issue from him. And let it be written into the laws of Persia and Media, and let it not be revoked, that Vashti did not appear before King Ahasuerus, and let the king confer her royal title upon another woman who is better than she. And the king's decree about what he will do to Vashti shall be heard throughout the kingdom, for it is great. And all the women will give respect to their husbands, from the greatest to the smallest. The idea pleased the king and his ministers, and the king did as Memucan advised. He sent letters to all the king's provinces, to each province in its script, and to each nation in its language, saying that every man shall be master in his home, and that he speak the language of his nation.
Oh, sorry. That ends chapter 1. Shira Yael Phillips has donated. PK Sakara has donated. Yay. Lisa Gilman has donated through our website. We thank you on behalf of the needy people that we've interacted with personally, who really we're going to appreciate the donations today on this Purim. It's a mitzvah to give gifts to the poor on Purim. So Yasher Koch.
Lisa Gilman, after the show ends, I'm going to post an amazing photograph of Lisa when she was a kid and her sister dressed up in a really, really amazing Purim costume, which is they dressed as the actual Megillah itself. So Lisa, I have not forgotten that photo, and I'm going to be posting it later today.
Awesome. And I see other donations coming in now. Thomas Beck, Renee Fott,
Yay.
and Guy Thomas Kennedy,
Yay.
and James Roth.
AT Daily, people.
All right, Yasher Koach, everybody. Just as you made this mitzvah today, so may you be strengthened to complete many more mitzvahs to 120.
Amen.
Everything you give today will come back to you many times over. Chapter 2, the search for a new queen. After these events, when King Ahasuerus's wrath had subsided, he remembered Vashti, what she had done and what had been decreed upon her. So the king's attendants advised, "Let virgin maidens of beautiful appearance be sought for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, and let them gather every virgin maiden of beautiful appearance to Shushan the capital, to the harem, under the charge of Hega, chamberlain of the king, custodian of the women, and let their cosmetic lotions be provided, and let the maiden who finds favor in the king's eyes become queen in Vashti's stead." The plan pleased the king, and he enacted it. There was a Judean man in Shushan the capital, and his name was Mordechai. Yay! Son of Yair, son of Shimi, son of Kish, a Benjamite. He had been exiled from Jerusalem with the exiles who had been exiled along with Jeconiah, the king of Judea, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had sent into exile. He had raised Hadassah, she is Esther, called by both names, the daughter of his uncle, sounds like his cousin, for she had neither father nor mother. The maiden had beautiful facial features and a lovely complexion, and after her father and mother died, Mordechai adopted her as a daughter. It happened that when the king's order and edict became known, and many maidens were gathered to Shushan the capital, under the charge of Haggai, Esther was taken to the palace under the charge of Haggai, custodian of the women. The maiden found favor in his eyes and won his kindness. So he rushed in a way that he did not do so for any other maiden, reminiscent of Joseph when he was imprisoned in Egypt, to provide her with cosmetic lotions and meals, as well as the 7 maidens from the king's palace to attend to her, which she was entitled to be provided with. He treated her and her maidens differently, pampering them in the harem. Esther did not divulge her race or ancestry, since Mordechai had instructed her not to divulge it. Every day, Mordechai would stroll in front of the harem courtyard to find out how Esther was faring and what would be done with her. When each maiden's turn came to go to King Ahasuerus, after undergoing the prescribed 12-month care for women, for only then would their period of beauty care be completed, 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 months with perfumes and women's cosmetic lotions, with which the maiden would appear before the king, she would be provided with whatever entertainment and music she requested to accompany her from the house of the women to the palace. I'm just thinking, can husbands identify like, honey, let's go. Let's go. We're going to be late. Can you imagine 6 months waiting for her to be ready? In the evening, she would go to...
a year, I thought.
A year. 6 and 6. Very good.
And she was already the most beautiful woman in Shushan.
In the evening. So that would be the answer to any husband who says, come on, let's go. Did they rush Esther? How did that turn out? In the evening, she would go to the king, and in the morning, she would return to the second harem under the charge of Shaashgaz, the king's chamberlain, the custodian of the concubines. She would not go to the king again unless the king desired her, whereupon she would be summoned by name.
One of the great mysteries of Purim that I've never really heard a solid answer to is, what exactly is the relationship between Esther and Mordechai? Is he her uncle? Is he her cousin? Is he her husband? Unclear. I'm starting here?
Yes.
And when the time came for Esther, daughter of Abihail, who was the uncle of Mordechai. Okay, so her father was Mordechai's uncle, sounds like cousins, who had adopted her as a daughter to go to the king. She did not request anything other than what Haggai, the king's chamberlain, custodian of the women, would advise. Esther found favor in all who beheld her. And I'm assuming that means she was beautiful inside and out. Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus to his palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tevet, in the 7th year of his reign. The king loved Esther more than all the non-virgin. What does it say?
Where are you?
I don't want to put on my glasses, but I can't see that
Then
word.
all the non-virgin women.
All the non-virgin women that have been gathered to him. And she won his favor and kindness more than all the virgins as well. He placed the royal crown on her head and made her queen in Vashti's stead. The king made a grand feast for all his ministers and servants, called the Feast of Esther. And in his house, and in his honor, he offered a tax relief for the provinces and gave presents, a tax holiday, and gave presents befitting a king, all to entice Esther to reveal her origins. When the virgins were gathered a second time, and Mordechai was sitting at the king's gate, as Esther would not divulge her ancestry or race, Mordechai has instructed her. So don't ask, don't tell, don't say you're Jewish. Esther followed Mordecai's instruction just as she had done under his care. In those days, while Mordecai sat at the king's gate, Bigtan and Teresh, two of the king's chamberlains from the vessel guards, became angry and sought to assassinate King Ahasuerus. Ooh, the plot thickens. The matter became known to Mordecai, and he informed Queen Esther. Esther informed the king of it in Mordecai's name. So that's an important little moment. So Esther told the king about the plot that Mordecai had overheard, and she said Mordecai heard this. So from this we learn, you may have heard, like, people teaching Torah will always say, so such and such rabbi said in the name of such and such rabbi. So when you hear a great piece of Torah from somebody, from a teacher, you should always give them credit. Just as Esther told King Ahasuerus that it was Mordecai that overheard the plot. The matter was investigated and found to be true, and the two were hanged on the gallows. This favor that Mordecai did to the king was recorded in the book of Chronicles before the king.
And so concludes chapter 2 of the book of Esther. There are 10 chapters in the book. We are doing great raising funds for the needy today. We've got $489 in on Facebook.
Awesome.
And I think we've got about like 200, maybe 250 in through our website. If you want to donate through our website, donate.accidentaltalmudist.org. Be sure to mention Purim so we know it goes through us and straight to the needy folks that we've interacted with directly, who really need it and will appreciate it tremendously. It is a mitzvah to give to the poor on Purim. Okay, everybody's doing great. Let's enter chapter 3. After these events, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman,
Bad guy! Woo, boo!
son of Hamdata the Agagite, and raised him up, and he placed his seat above all his fellow ministers. All the king's servants at the king's gate kneeled and bowed to Haman.
Boo!
For so had the king commanded concerning him. But Mordechai would not kneel or bow.
A Jew does not bow.
To other people. By the
Bow
way,
to God only.
you can bow, like if you're doing martial arts and you're going to make a polite bow to your partner or your sensei. That's okay. It's whenever there could be even the hint of idolatry, then you can't bow. And that's why our sages teach it wasn't that Mordecai wouldn't bow out of respect to a powerful minister, but rather because Haman wore an idol around his neck.
What it was? But I thought you're not supposed to bow to a worldly being.
If it even could be misinterpreted as idolatry. So they wanted to make sure to make it clear that Mordecai would not bow because of the idolatrous aspect of it. The king...
Haman got triggered by that.
And Haman got triggered by that. Haman was the guy who had a big idea how the kingdom should be run, and here comes the Jew who knows better, and triggers Haman's Jew hatred. The king's servants at the king's gate said to Mordecai, "Why do you transgress the king's command?" It happened that when they had said this to him day after day, and he did not listen to them, they told Haman to see if Mordecai's words would prevail, for he had told them that he was a Jew. Haman saw that Mordecai would neither kneel nor bow to him, and Haman was filled with wrath. He disdained the thought of killing only Mordecai, for they had informed him of Mordecai's nationality. Haman sought to annihilate all the Jews throughout Ahasuerus' entire kingdom, Mordecai's people. In the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus's reign, a pur, singular, plural is Purim, a pur, which is a lot, like a lottery, was cast before Haman for every day and every month. And it fell on the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Haman said to King Ahasuerus.
Can I use the bell to make noise about Haman?
Sure, why not?
This is the Haman. This is our grogger.
Today. Haman said to King Ahasuerus. Now here is the twisted logic of a Jew hater. There is one nation scattered and dispersed among the nations throughout the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are unlike those of any other nation. They do not observe the king's laws. That's a lie. Yeah. And it is not in the king's interest to tolerate them. If it please the king, let an edict be written and sent to the nobles of the provinces that they be destroyed. And I will weigh out 10,000 silver talents through the king's functionaries to be deposited in the king's treasuries. The king removed his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, the son of Hamdata the Agagite, persecutor of the Jews. The king said to Haman, the money is given to you, and the nation is yours to do with as you please. The king's scribes were summoned during the first month of the year, Nisan, on its 13th day, and all that Haman had commanded to the king's satraps and governors of each province and to the nobles of each nation was written. To each province according to its script, and each nation according to its language. It was written in the king's name and sealed with the king's signet ring. Letters were sent with couriers to all the provinces of the king. That was the major innovation of Persia. It was the most high-tech communication system the world had ever known, like a Pony Express. And they chopped the time that it would take for a message to go thousands of miles. They sliced it down by a huge factor.
It was actually more efficient than our postal service.
Could be.
We didn't get mail. We didn't get mail for 2 weeks a few months ago. And then suddenly after 2 weeks, the mailman shows up. I said, we haven't gotten mail for 2 weeks. He said, yeah, I was on vacation.
Yeah. See,
that didn't happen in Shushan.
The Persia Pony Express did not take vacations. Sent to the provinces of the king to annihilate, murder, and destroy all of the Jews, from young to old, children and women, on one day, the 13th day of the 12th month of the year, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their possessions. And the message of the letter was that the law be proclaimed in every province, clearly to all the nations, that they should be ready for that day. The couriers hurried out by order of the king, and the law was proclaimed in Shushan, the capital. So right there, every Jew in the world heard the message that on a day, in a few months, all of us are going to be annihilated. And the king and Haman sat down to drink, and the city of Shushan was in turmoil.
It reminds me a little bit about Spain. When they banished the Jews in 1492, I think also they said this day is the day. It's coming up in a few months, and you guys all got to be out of here because we're going to kill you all that day.
Just so.
Yeah.
Just so. And also this harkens back to that after the brothers sold Joseph into slavery in Egypt, they sat down to a meal. So God returns that measure for measure against the Jews. That Haman and Ahasuerus decided this terrible fate of the Jews, and then sat down to have a drink. Oh. That ends chapter 3.
A special kind of evil. Let's commit genocide now. That makes me hungry.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Okay. Mordechai knew all that had occurred. Mordechai tore his clothes and donned sackcloth and ash. He went out into the city and cried with a great and bitter cry. He went up until the king's gate, for it is not proper to enter the king's gate wearing sackcloth. And in every province, wherever the order of the king reached via the couriers, and his law was proclaimed, there was great mourning among the Jews, and fasting, crying, and wailing. Sackcloth and ash were spread out for the masses. Esther's maids and chamberlains came and told her, and the queen was terribly afraid. So I guess Ahasuerus doesn't know she's Jewish?
Correct.
Okay.
Not yet.
She sent garments with which to dress Mordechai and to remove his sackcloth from upon him, but he did not accept them. Esther summoned Hathach, one of the king's chamberlains he had placed in her service, and she commanded him to go to Mordechai and find out what this was and what this was for. Hatak went out to Mordechai to the city square that was in front of the king's gate. Mordechai told him all that had happened to him, and the meaning of the money that Haman promised to weigh out to the king's treasuries for the right to destroy the Jews. He also gave him the message of the edict that was proclaimed in Shushan, calling for their annihilation, to show it to Esther and to tell her about it, and to instruct her to go to the king to beseech him and plead with him on behalf of her nation. Hatak went and relayed the words of Mordechai to Esther. Esther spoke to Hatak, commanding him to relay to Mordechai, all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that any man or woman who goes to the king and enters the inner courtyard without being summoned, his is but one verdict, execution. You cannot go just, drop it on the king without an invitation. The only exception is the person to whom the king extends his royal scepter, his golden scepter. He may live. And I have not been summoned to come to the king for 30 days now. They relayed Esther's words to Mordecai. Mordecai said to respond to Esther, "Do not think to yourself that you will find refuge in the king's palace, and thus be saved from among all the Jews. For if you will remain silent at this time, relief and salvation will arise for the Jews from another source. Oh, don't worry, somebody's going to step up for us. And you and the house of your father will be lost. And who knows, if at about this time next year, on the day of annihilation, you will retain your royal position and thus find refuge in the palace."
Wait. So this is one of those key lines of the Megillah, and it's a line you really want to take with you into the rest of the year. You want to bring the Simcha of Purim with you the rest of the year, and this question that Mordechai asks Esther: Umi yodeya im le'es kazois haga'at lemalchus, right? Who knows if it not for this moment that you were placed in this position? Who knows, right? So often, we think, well, I'm just floating along. I'm not that important. It's not like I'm going to affect, events for other people, let alone the whole world. Who knows? But whether you were placed in your situation at this moment in your life, in this world, for an opportunity that's going to come your way to be of service to the people around you. And when that moment presents itself, don't think that, somebody else will step in. That moment was orchestrated for you.
May very well step in.
Right.
But you missed your opportunity. So we're all Esther. And
Exactly.
every moment of our life, there's some way we can be of service, some way we can make a difference. And that is why we're in that actual situation at that moment.
And the particular clue of that is if you're ever in a situation where only you can do a particular service, only you can create, something that's going to entertain or enlighten or beautify, only you can solve somebody else's problem, only you can fix that machine that nobody else can fix. So step up. Who knows if it wasn't for that moment that all of your life and all of world history was designed so you would be there at that moment. Okay. So you said they relayed Esther's words to Mordechai.
Mordechai said to respond to Esther. Oh, we already got this.
Oh, who knows at this time?
You
yes.
might still actually be queen.
Very good. And Esther said to respond.
Go and gather all the Jews who are in Shushan and fast for my sake.
Right, you didn't read that. Esther said to respond to Mordechai.
Go and gather all the Jews who are in Shushan and fast for my sake. So yesterday was the fast of Esther. We were fasting, and I guess it's kind of to remember and to pay tribute. You know what? If all those guys could fast, we're, thank God, not facing genocide at this moment, we can fast too to show our solidarity.
Amen.
Do not eat and do not drink for 3 days. Okay, so we were only do not eat and do not drink for just 1 day.
And a little bit of whining about it.
A lot of whining for some of us. And do not drink night and day. Do not eat and do not drink for 3 days, night and day? That's can you even survive not drinking for 3? Wow.
Apparently.
My maids and I shall also fast in the same way. Then I shall go to the king, although it is unlawful. And as I have perished, so I will perish. Mordechai transgressed Torah law and did all that Esther had instructed him. What does that mean, as Mordechai transgressed Torah law?
Was it Shabbos?
Is there a note? Maybe on the next page?
No doubt. What does it say? Mordechai transgressed. He transgressed Torah law by adopting Esther's 3-day fast from the 14th to the 16th of Nisan, even though it is the second day. Its second day occurred on the first day of Pesach, a day when fasting is forbidden. It was Passover when they were fasting.
So did he consult a rabbi, I think? Or he...
Well, he's the gadol of the generation.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so he took it upon himself.
So is that transgressing Torah law then? If he...
Well, no, because it's pikuach nefesh, right?
Okay.
He saw that
Saving
it could
a life.
save lives, but it was not that direct that it would save a life. But he took that risk. Okay. What was that?
Put the screen back up.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Here we go. Okay. We're doing great. We've raised about 700, and that's the end of chapter 4.
Okay.
Starting chapter 5, we've raised about $700 for the needy. Let's see if we can do better. You can donate either through the donate button on Facebook or directly through our website, donate.accidentaltalmudist.org, and mention Purim so that we know that it flows right through us and to the needy individuals that we have identified who will appreciate these gifts so much.
Yeah.
Okay.
Chapter 5.
Chapter 5. Esther goes to the king. It was on the 3rd day that Esther donned garments of royalty and stood in the inner courtyard of the palace, facing the palace. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the palace, facing the chamber entrance. It happened that when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the courtyard, she found favor in his eyes. The king extended the golden scepter that was in his hand, and Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. And the king said to her, "What need do you have, Queen Esther, and what is your request? Even if it be up to half the kingdom, it will be granted to you." Esther said, "If it please the king, let the king and Haman come today to the feast that I have prepared for him." Now, note how smart Esther is, right? There's so many things that it's good that we want to do in the world, Torah messages that we want to share. Yeah, so sometimes asking directly is not the smart way to do it. You want to set the table, as it were. Sometimes you want to share a Torah teaching within the context of an entertaining story or a funny story or a thrilling story, right? You're going to collect. You want people to understand what it is that you're collecting for. Then make the request. So Esther said, "If it please the king, let the king and Haman come today to the feast that I have prepared for him." The king said, "Rush Haman to fulfill Esther's bidding." The king and Haman came to the feast that Esther had prepared. At the wine feast, the king said to Esther, "What is your plea? It will be granted to you. And what is your request? Even if it be up to half the kingdom, it shall be done." Esther replied and said, "My plea and my request is this: if I have found favor in the king's eyes, and if it please the king to grant my plea and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come to the feast that I shall prepare for them, and tomorrow I shall fulfill the king's request." On that day, Haman left the king's presence, happy and in good spirits. But when Haman saw Mordechai at the king's gate, and Mordechai neither rose nor showed fear before him, Haman was filled with wrath against Mordechai. Haman restrained himself and went to his house, and he sent for and brought his friends and his wife Zeresh. Haman told them of his glorious wealth and his many sons, and about the extent to which the king had promoted him and how he had raised him above all the king's ministers and servants. Haman said, "Furthermore, Queen Esther invited nobody but me along with the king to the feast that she prepared. Tomorrow, too, I am invited to hear her feast along with the king, and yet all this is worthless to me whenever I see Mordechai the Jew sitting at the king's gate."
I mean, what? Like, what?
What a loser.
How does it affect him?
Exactly.
It was his ego.
Ego. His wife Zeresh and all his friends, great friends, said to him, "So have a gallows made 50 cubits high, and in the morning tell the king to have Mordechai hanged on it. Then you will be able to go happily with the king to the feast." Haman was pleased with the idea, and he made the gallows.
Everything
concludes.
would have been great. The guy had so much power. He's the right-hand man of the king. Mordecai, just ignore him. Just ignore the guy, right? Couldn't do it.
Thus ever with Jew haters. Chapter 6.
On that night, the king's sleep escaped him. He had insomnia. He told his attendants to bring the book of records, the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. It must be so boring, you know? Like, you're going to read a really boring book to
help you
fall
sleep.
asleep. Yeah. It was found written that Mordecai had informed Bigtan and Teresh, two of the king's chamberlains. Oh, those were the assassins, the would-be assassins from the Vessel guards, who had sought to assassinate King Ahasuerus. The king said, "What honor and greatness has been accorded to Mordecai for this?" The king's attendant said, "Nothing was done for him." The king said, "Who of my advisors is in the courtyard?" Haman,
Ooh.
had come to the outer courtyard of the king's chambers to tell the king to hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had made for him. The king's attendant said to him, "Behold, Haman, is standing in the courtyard." The king said, "Let him enter." Haman entered, and the king said to him, "What should be done for a man whom the king wishes to honor?" So we went to a Megillah reading last night, and they booed for Haman a lot, and now this morning they were like, well, we're only going to boo for him when he's mentioned in terms of
His
son
title,
of his father.
with his title, yes.
All right. So Haman said to himself, "Whom would the king wish to honor more than me?" Haman said to the king, "For a man whom the king wishes to honor, let them bring a royal garment that the king has worn, a horse upon which the king has ridden, and the royal crown that has been placed on his head. And let the garment and the horse be entrusted in the hands of one of the king's governing ministers, and let them dress the man whom the king wishes to honor. And let them lead him on the horse through the city square, proclaiming before him, 'So is done for the man whom the king wishes to honor.'" The king said to Haman, "Hurry, take the garment and the horse, just as you have said, and do so for Mordecai the Jew." Oh, that's the ultimate. Who
Hoisted on his own petard, right?
sits at the king's gate. You could just imagine Haman's face, like, "Oh, a dagger. Omit nothing from all you have spoken." Haman took the garment and dressed Mordecai, and he led him through the city square and proclaimed before him, oh, this must have been so bitter in his mouth, "So is done for the man whom the king wishes to honor." Mordecai then returned to the king's gate, while Haman hurried to his house in mourning and with his head covered. He's like, you sometimes see like somebody arrested on TV and they're like covering up their face with their coat. That was Haman. Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends about all that had happened to him. His wise men and his wife Zeresh said to him, "If this Mordecai, before you have begun to fall, is of Jewish descent, you shall not prevail over him, for you will certainly fall before him."
Talk about fair weather friends.
They may have hated the Jews, but they knew through history, like, go against us, eventually it's going to bite you in the butt.
Right.
While they were still talking with him, the chamberlains of the king arrived, and they rushed to bring Haman to the feast that Esther had prepared.
So concludes chapter 6. All right. We are on chapter 7. Chapter 10 is very short, so we're really kind of in the home stretch now. We'd love to make a big collection for the needy today on Purim. So you can donate through the donate button on Facebook or directly through our website, donate.accidentaltalmudist.org. And remember to mention Purim so it goes to the needy direct, rather than just supporting Torah education like normally our donations do.
It's great to support Torah education, but on Purim, it's really a mitzvah to provide for essential needs like food.
Exactly. Also mention that we've got Heiko tuning in from Caracas, Venezuela. Great to have you with us over there on the YouTube side. Okay, chapter 7. You want me to start?
Oh.
The king and Haman.
Well, I'm just going to boo when it's like Haman.
More formal.
Blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
The king and Haman came to drink with Queen Esther again on the second day. During the wine feast, the king said to Esther, "What is your plea, Queen Esther? It will be granted to you. And what is your request? Even if it will be up to half the kingdom, it will be done." Queen Esther replied and said, "If I have found favor in your eyes, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be granted to me by my plea, and the lives of my people by my request, for my people and I have been sold to be annihilated, killed, and destroyed. Had we been sold as slaves and maidservants, I would have kept silent. I'm speaking because the persecutor is not concerned with the king's loss of manpower, and he intends to kill us. King Ahasuerus said. He said to Queen Esther, "Who is this? And which one is he who had the audacity to do such a thing?" Esther said, "A man who is a persecutor and an enemy. This evil Haman."
Ooh, snap.
Haman was aghast in the presence of the king and queen. The king arose in his wrath from the wine feast and went to the orchard's garden, and Haman stood up to beg Queen Esther for his life because he saw
the tables have turned.
Because he saw that the king's hostility towards him was determined. It's such an odd reaction. This evil man who sought to kill the queen and all her people. Man, I'm so mad, I'm going to leave the room and leave him alone in the room with my queen. Okay, so the king arose in his wrath from the wine feast, and he went to the orchard's garden, and Haman stood up to beg Queen Esther for his life, because he saw that the king's hostility toward him was determined. The king returned from the orchard's garden to the wine feast chamber, and what did he see? And Haman was falling on the divan upon which Esther was reclining, and the king said, "Does he also intend to have his way with the queen while I am in the palace?" As soon as these words left the king's mouth, the face of Haman was covered in shame.
Oh, I bet.
Harvona, one of the chamberlains, stood before the king and said, "Well, sire, furthermore, there are the gallows that Haman made for Mordechai,
How convenient.
the man who spoke up for the king's good and saved him from assassination. It is standing at Haman's house 50 cubits high." And the king said, "Hang him on it."
Oh.
They hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordechai, and the king's wrath abated. Chapter 8. Very close to the end. So if you want to donate to the poor through our organization, do it now. Use the Facebook donate button or through our website, donate.accidentaltalmudist.org, and mention Purim. Chapter 8.
On that day, King Ahasuerus gave Queen Esther the estate of Haman, his entire estate, persecutor of the Jews, and Mordechai came before the king, for Esther had told the king how he was related to her. Which, again, we still don't really understand that. The king removed his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordechai, and Esther appointed Mordechai over Haman's estate. Esther again spoke before the king and fell before his feet. She cried and beseeched him to avert the evil scheme of Haman the Agagite and his plot that he had plotted against the Jews. The king extended the golden scepter to Esther, and Esther rose and stood before the king. She said, "If it please the king, and if I found favor before him, and the idea is proper before the king, and I am pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to all provinces, ordering them to return the letters containing the plot of Haman, son of Amminadab the Agagite, who had written instructions to destroy the Jews who lived throughout the king's provinces. For how can I endure and survive while beholding the calamity that will befall my people? And how can I endure and survive when beholding the destruction of my family?" King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and Mordechai the Jew, "Behold, I have given Haman's estate to Esther, and he was hanged on the gallows for raising his hand against the Jews. As for you, write letters concerning the Jews as you please in the king's name, and seal them with the king's signet ring, because a letter written in this king's name and sealed with the king's signet ring should not be withdrawn." The king's scribes were then
So you can't withdraw the old letters, but you can send a new letter that overrides those instructions.
The king's scribes were then summoned in the 3rd month, the month of Sivan, on its 23rd day, and an edict was written according to all that Mordechai had instructed the Jews, the satraps. So that's one of those words you pretty much only see
Yes,
in the
the
Megillah.
satraps.
The satraps. Not sure what it means, but this is the only time I've ever seen that word. The governors and the nobles of the provinces from India to Cush, 127 provinces, to each province according to its script, and to each nation according to its language, and to the Jews according to their script and their language. He wrote it in King Ahasuerus' name and sealed it with the king's signet ring. He sent the letters by couriers to travel speedily on horseback, riders of speedy camels, so horseback and camels, the B'nai Harachamim, So I guess the ones of mercy.
The sons of mercy.
The sons of mercy. The edict stated that the king had allowed the Jews of every city to gather and stand up for their lives, to annihilate, kill, and destroy every army of any nation or province that oppresses them, including their children and women, and to plunder their possessions on one day in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus on the 13th of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Copies of the edict were sent to be proclaimed as law in every province, clearly to all the nations, and so that the Jews would be ready for that day to take revenge upon their enemies. And yes, it's okay to celebrate taking revenge upon your enemies. The couriers, riders of speedy camels. I didn't know camels were that speedy.
Sure.
Okay, I didn't know.
Faster than walking.
Okay. Left urgently and hurriedly by order of the king, and the law was proclaimed in Shushan, the capital. And Mordechai emerged from the king's presence, wearing a royal garment of blue and white, a large golden crown, a shawl of fine linen, and a garment of purple wool. And the city of Shushan celebrated and rejoiced. For the Jews there was light and happiness, joy and glory.
Which we recite at Havdalah.
And in every province and in every city, wherever the king's edict had reached, there was happiness and joy for the Jews, a feast and a holiday. Woo! Many of the Gentiles converted to Judaism. That's so cool. So many people were like, we're going to join these guys. For fear of the Jews had fallen upon them.
So concludes chapter 8. Chapter 9 is the last of the full-length chapters. Then 10 is very short. We're doing great. We're at about $800 that we've raised for the needy on this Purim.
Cool.
Using the Facebook button and through our website, donate.accidentaltalmudist.org, and mention Purim so it goes to the needy. Okay. I'll go chapter 9. The Jews vanquish their enemies. And by the way, this is a nice model that gives the lie to this idea of the Nebuchadnezzar Jew, right? I mean, it was a very small minority of the population. That's why the Jews were vulnerable. But it wasn't, hey, on this day, when they were going to kill you, we're going to send the cavalry to save you. The Jews were armed and able to defend themselves. And that is an important value as well. On the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, when the time for implementing the king's edict and law had arrived, on the day the enemies of the Jews had thought that they would dominate them, the situation was reversed and the Jews dominated their enemies. The Jews gathered in their cities throughout the provinces of King Ahasuerus to attack those who sought to harm them. No man stood in their way, for fear of them had fallen upon all the nations. And all the ministers of the provinces, the satraps and the governors and the king's functionaries exalted the Jews, for fear of Mordechai had fallen upon them. For Mordechai was now the most prominent official in the king's palace, and his fame was spreading throughout all the provinces. And people said that the man Mordechai was steadily rising in power. The Jews struck at all their enemies, attacking them with the sword, killing and destroying. They did with their enemies as they wanted. In Shushan, the capital, the Jews killed and depleted 500 men, as well as these are the sons of Haman, as well as
to say it quickly, I think, right?
Parshandata, Dalphon, Aspata, Porata, Adalia, Aridata, Parmashta, Arisai, Aridai, and Vaisata, the 10 sons of Haman, son of Hamdata, persecutor of the Jews. But they took none of the spoils. That day, the number of fatalities in Shushan, the capital, was relayed to the king. The king said to the queen, Esther, in Shushan, the capital, the Jews killed and depleted 500 men, as well as the 10 sons of Haman. What have they done in the other provinces of the king? What is your plea? It will be granted to you. What is your additional request? It shall be done. Esther replied, if it please the king, let the Jews of Shushan be also allowed to do tomorrow what was lawful today. And let the 10 sons of Haman be hanged on the gallows. They're already dead, but let them be hung.
So bizarre. They were already dead. Imagine the process of dragging a dead body up, putting it in the noose. Bizarre.
But it was not bizarre. It was very clever statecraft to make it clear that trying to annihilate the Jews was a terrible idea and would always be so.
But why not just hang them?
The first day?
Yeah, like kill them by hanging.
There was a reason. let's assume there was a good reason.
I'm sure.
The king ordered this done, and the law was proclaimed in Shushan, and the 10 sons of Haman were hanged. The Jews of Shushan gathered also on the 14th day of the month of Adar, that's today, and killed 300 men in Shushan, but took none of the spoils. And the rest of the Jews in the king's provinces gathered and stood up for their lives to relieve themselves of their enemies. And they killed 75,000 of their enemies, but took none of the spoils. On the 13th day of the month of Adar, they rested on the 14th day and established it as a day of feasting and rejoicing. The Jews who were in Shushan gathered on the 13th and 14th of Adar, and they rested on the 15th. That's why tomorrow, it already started tonight, is Shushan Purim, but that is only celebrated in ancient walled cities, including Jerusalem. The Jews who were in Shushan gathered on the 13th and 14th and rested on the 15th and established it as a day of feasting and rejoicing. Thus, the Perazi Jews, those who live in cities that are unwalled, Perazot, make the 14th day of the month of Adar a day of rejoicing, feasting, and a holiday. That's today. And the sending of portions of food to one another. That's gifts to friends. Mordechai recorded these events, and he sent letters to all the Jews living throughout the provinces of King Ahasuerus, near and far, instructing them to obligate themselves to celebrate annually the 14th and 15th for the Jews living in walled cities, days of the month of Adar, like the days upon which the Jews rested, having been relieved of their enemies, and the month that had been transformed from them, from one of sorrow to joy, from mourning to festivity, to make them days of feasting and rejoicing, and of the sendings of food portions to one to another, and gifts to the poor, which is why we're collecting today, so you can fulfill the mitzvah of sending gifts to the poor, as recorded here in the Megillah. And the Jews accepted as an obligation that which they had begun to observe voluntarily, and that which Mordechai had written to them. For Haman, the son of Hamdata the Agagite, persecutor of all the Jews, plotted against the Jews to destroy them, and he cast a pur, which is a lot, to confound them and to destroy them. But when she came before the king, he stated verbally and conveyed with letters to reverse Haman's evil plot against the Jews upon his own head, upon he and his sons, and he and his sons were hanged upon the gallows. They therefore called these days Purim, the plural of pur. For the poor, P-U-R, for the poor, and established the holiday and recorded its narrative for posterity because of all of the events of this epistle, which recounts what prompted the characters to act as they did and what happened to them. The Jews established and accepted upon themselves and upon their descendants, that's us, and upon all who might convert to their faith, to annually celebrate these 2 days according to their script, on their proper dates, never to be abolished, and that these days be commemorated and celebrated in every generation by every family, in every province, and in every city, and that these days of Purim will never depart from among the Jews, nor will their commemoration cease from their descendants. And we have a tradition that we will celebrate Purim even after Mashiach comes. The next year,
Queen Esther, daughter of Avichail and Mordechai the Jew, wrote about the enormity of all the aspects of the miracle. To establish the holiday with the second Purim epistle? Epistle,
I think.
And Mordechai sent letters to all the Jews, to the 127 provinces of Ahasuerus' kingdom, words of peace and truth, instructing them to obligate themselves to observe these days of Purim on their proper dates, in the manner that Mordechai the Jew and Queen Esther obligated them, just as they had accepted upon themselves and upon their descendants the observance of the fasts and their lamentations. So that's the interesting thing about being Jewish is, like, you know, our ancestors had accepted these laws on behalf of their descendants. So even though we didn't necessarily accept them ourselves, like, we're still kind of bound to what thousands of years ago our ancestors took upon.
It's not easy to be a Jew. You're obligated. That's it.
And the request of Esther confirmed the aspects of these Purim days, and the story was included in Scripture.
In Scripture, the last book added to the Bible.
Oh, the last book added to the Bible.
I'm pretty sure.
Of course, yeah, makes sense. Do you want to do it?
Go ahead. Well, before we do chapter 10, the last chapter, very short, just 3 Pesukim, 3 verses. A big Yasher Koach to everybody who donated to the poor through us: Stephen Johnson, Nicholas Ackerman, Linda Williams, Gail Hart, Corey Flowers, James Roth, Guy Kennedy, PK Sakara, Shira Phillips, Nikki Matthews, Reba Linker, Nina Soliner, Yehudit Sobel, Rebecca Cohen, Linda Fuqua, Janice Beanstalk, Paula Klauser, Chris Malabranch, Pedro Fotografo, Ruth Schaefer, and Lisa Gilman, and Thomas Beck, and Renee Fott, and Lucy Johnson. Yoo-hoo! As you fulfill the mitzvah of giving gifts to the poor on Purim, so may you be strengthened to perform many mitzvahs to 120 years of age.
Amen.
Okay, chapter 10.
Ahasuerus levied a tax upon the mainland and the islands of the sea. And the entire history of his power and strength and the story behind Mordechai's prominence, having been promoted by the king, reminds me a little bit of Joseph, right? He went from the dungeon to the king's top advisor. Mordechai went from, a decree against him to the king's top advisor. And the entire history of power and strength and the story behind Mordechai's prominence, having been promoted by the king, are recorded in the book of Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia. For Mordechai the Jew was second in command to King Ahasuerus, a respected leader to the Jews, and was found favorable by a majority of his brethren. Now, this is the typical Jewish moment, okay? That's Jews for you, okay? So Mordechai, he's one of the heroes of this story. He
saved all the Jewish people.
Saved the entire Jewish people. And he was found favorable by a majority of his brethren.
Who were the naysayers of Mordechai?
So who were those Jews that just were not impressed? He sought goodness for his people and spoke up for the welfare of all their children.
And so concludes the book of Esther. Mazel Tov, Yasher Koach, just as you, if you've given gifts to the poor or sent gifts to your friends, you should, now, this does not fulfill one's obligation to hear the Megillah. You should hear the Megillah on Purim if at all possible. If you have a Chabad rabbi in your town, tell him you want to hear the Megillah, he'll make sure you do.
You still have, depending on where you are, you may still have time.
You may still have time. But also eating a festive meal, getting somewhat inebriated, sending gifts to friends, and gifts to the poor. That's how we celebrate Purim. It's been a delight and an honor to celebrate Purim with you, our pals, and our annual tradition to read the book of Esther. I guess the next time we'll gather like this is Shavuos when we read Ruth, right?
Oh, that's right.
Because we don't really have a Pesach thing like that.
We need to come. If anybody has a suggestion for a Pesach, a Passover tradition.
To read the Haggadah?
To read the... we already do it during the Seder, but let's think about that. But Book of Ruth, my favorite book of the Bible, that's going to be coming up in June. Yeah. June.
I think June is... Shavuos is usually in June or near June.
Okay.
All right. Well, it's been wonderful. The people that we are going to, pass along these donations to will really, really appreciate it. They can use it. People who've fallen on tough times. I hope you've enjoyed that. Let me just see if there's any questions, perhaps, that we can answer before we go. Let me just see. It's a lot of very positive commentary. Yay. Hey, Sal, is there a story behind the feather in your cap? The feather in my cap. No, it's just when I was in the hat store where I like to go, Hollywood Hatters here on Melrose in Los Angeles. It's a funny store. It's frequented by... religious Jews, Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox Jews, and older African-American men. That's who goes there.
That's who wears hats.
That's who's into hats still. Kennedy killed a hat. And when I saw this hat, I just loved it. Like, it's not a prop hat. It's like a genuine topper, and it's so nice and really comfortable. And I just don't get to wear it enough. And so I was getting it, and my buddy, Sal, who's the only other Jewish Salvador that I've ever met, said, "Oh, Sal, you gotta have a feather in the cap." And I was like, "That's a pretty extreme feather, don't you think?" Sal's like, No. You could pull it off, Sal. That's the feather in your cap." So that's the story of that feather. Let's see. Somebody said, Tom says, satrap is a ruler's representative. It's a lovely, highly useful word.
Okay. Thank you, Tom.
Okay. Am I seeing any other questions? I think that's about it. Is there some way to donate without computers? Yes. I mean, if you go, I'm pretty sure that on the donate page, on our website, it has the address where you can send a check. But our office address, go ahead, Nina, talk, and I'll write it here.
If you send a check, make sure on the subject line you put Purim, and then we'll just pass it over
on the memo line.
I'm sorry, on the memo line, and then we'll pass that over to our recipients of our charitable donations today. So Sal's writing. Keep talking. So anyway, this was just so great to share this with you guys. This is definitely the highlight of our Purim every year. And it's an opportunity for me to put on my blue wig and Sal to put on his hat with the feather.
That's it. Okay, yes, here's our address if you want to mail in a check. 5042 Wilshire Boulevard, number 170, Los Angeles, California, 90036. And indicate Purim in the memo line, so that we know it's not just for Torah education, like all donations to our organization, but specifically for the needy, right? Purim in the memo line. Make the check out, not to AT, but to Accidental Talmudist. Make out the check to Accidental Talmudist. That's the official name of our organization. Okay, I think that is it. Oh, Lisa says the blue wig would look nice on Sal, too.
Okay, maybe they'll do that next year.
Maybe. I'm not against it. I would never say no. Okay. All right. That's what we've got for today. All the best, and hopefully you are having a lot of fun on this Purim. You'll be doing some learning, some drinking, some giving gifts to your friends and to the needy, and above all, being besimcha, being joyful. Rejoice on this Purim. It's a mitzvah to be happy. All the best.
Wait, smile so that we can...
Oh.
Yeah, we need a thumbnail.
Sometimes I smile too big. That's good. That's a perfect smile. I'll be like... Okay.
It's hard to get a thumbnail because like one of us is always talking.
Exactly.